Harris, who'd left a young bride, killed. Jimmy Fuchs, whose time was nearly up, killed. Kempton, who also was due for leave, killed.
General Haig had seemed careless with his men's lives at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Now he argued for stopping the war without a total defeat of the Germans.
The British alone might bring the enemy to his knees, but why expend more British lives? And for what?
French General Charles Mangin insisted this would only store up trouble for the future.
No, no, no. We must go right into the heart of Germany. The Germans will not admit they were beaten. It is a fatal error, and France will pay for it.
But with winter setting in, any invasion of Germany would have to wait till spring 1919. By then, the Germans might have renewed their strength. Marshal Foch believed France would get what she wanted by negotiation. No need to battle on to Berlin. So the Allies set out to achieve on paper what their armies had not done in the field: obtain Germany's unconditional surrender. Foch chose to meet the Germans in Compiègne, 45 miles northeast of Paris, in a secluded forest through which a railway line conveniently ran. In his train on the 8th of November, Foch handed the armistice conditions to politician Matthias Erzberger, leader of the German delegation. Erzberger was visibly shaken by the terms Germany would have to accept just to obtain a ceasefire. Germany would have to evacuate Belgium and France, surrender her fleet, and pay compensation. The Allies would continue their blockade, disarm the Germans, and occupy the left bank of the Rhine. Germany was being forced to capitulate. Meanwhile, the country Erzberger represented was falling apart, its cities swept by revolution. The German people, exhausted by war and hunger, wanted democracy in and the Kaiser out. But it was the German army which forced the Kaiser to abdicate. He asked his generals to turn the army against the people, but the generals refused.
The army will return home in good order under its generals, but not under the command of your Majesty. It no longer stands behind your Majesty.
The Prussian dynasty of Frederick the Great was over. The next day, the Kaiser slipped into exile in Holland. He would live long enough to hear that Germany had beaten France in 1940. He never accepted that in 1918, his army had been defeated.
For 30 years, the army was my pride. Now, after 4.5 brilliant years of war, with unprecedented victories, it was brought down by a stab in the back from the dagger of the revolutionaries at the very moment when peace was within reach.
Most Germans rejoiced at the news that the Kaiser had gone.
I felt as if a heavy weight had suddenly been lifted from my heart. This definitely means the armistice will be signed.
Back in the forest at Compiègne, Erzberger now found himself representing the German Republic. At 5 a.m. on the 11th of November, he signed the armistice.
Hostilities temporarily cease, 1100 today, when all offensive action will cease. Present outpost line to be maintained and no troops to pass east of it other than road, etc. reconnaissance and working parties. No conversation with enemy to be allowed.
The most remarkable feature was the uncanny silence. The war was over.
Peace and safety was a new thing. It could not be grasped in a moment.
A dreadful blow. I was just beginning to enjoy it.
No more slaughter. No more maiming. No more mud and blood. No more shoveling bits of men's bodies and dumping them into sandbags. No more writing those dreadfully difficult letters to the next of kin of the dead. A strange and unreal thought was running through my mind. I had a future.
It was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
A great cheer arose all along the line. We could hear the men, 1,000 yards in front, raising holy hell. The French, behind our position, were dancing, shouting, and waving bottles of wine.
We were stupefied to see crowds of Boche running over to us between the minefields with their hands up and yelling like mad. They were crazy for cigarettes and chocolate. We had some burned rice that our boys wouldn't eat, and they fell on it like wolves.
Our soldiers were choked with emotion. I thought about my family, about all the women of France. Except those who are alone and who cry.
One great wave of joy swept round the world and found its way to every nook and cranny. No one was more delighted than our African soldiers, who cheered themselves hoarse.
Everybody came out. Disabled old men, old women in slippers, and housewives leaving lunch on the stove.
I wept with joy. 5,000 Indian soldiers lit their torches. The hilltops burst into fire with scores of bonfires.
I found myself arm in arm with soldiers I had never seen before. I forgot where we went, toured the streets, and sang and sang. The significance of what it means was overwhelming. Peace.
People whose lives were shaped by the war went home. People the world did not yet know. Ernest Hemingway, Bertolt Brecht, Harold Macmillan, Vera Brittain, Charles de Gaulle, Joseph Tito, Benito Mussolini, David Ben-Gurion, Mustafa Kemal. And one of the most insignificant of them all, for now, Adolf Hitler. The German armies in France and Belgium headed home.
How we had looked forward to this moment. We used to picture it as the most splendid event of our lives. And here we are now, humbled, our souls torn and bleeding. But we can be proud of our performance. Never before has a nation, a single army, had the whole world against it and stood its ground. We protected our homeland. They never got into Germany.
In mid-December 1918, the first German troops arrived in Berlin. The people welcomed them as an army with no cause to feel ashamed.
The men wore green laurel wreaths over their steel helmets. The machine guns were garlanded with green branches. Many a soldier had a child or sweetheart on his flower-wreathed horse. A feeling of confidence, of fresh hope in the future, seems to have returned with the troops.
Germany's new Republican Chancellor, Friedrich Ebert, reinforced the dangerous illusion that they had not been beaten in this war.
I salute you, who return unvanquished from the field of battle.
The Allies were in no doubt who had beaten whom. Allied troops moved into Germany and began their watch on the Rhine. The German fleet was surrendered to Britain, and the Allies assembled in Paris to dictate the terms of the peace. US President Woodrow Wilson crossed the Atlantic to put his idealism to the test.
We have used the great words right and justice, and now we are to prove whether or not we understand those words and how they are to be applied.
But the world had not stood still between the end of the war and the start of the peace talks. On the 22nd of November 1918, the Belgian King Albert came home in triumph to Brussels. Occupied lands had been won back. The French repossessed Alsace-Lorraine.
What a moving welcome. The people were so happy and smiling. Some were pale and cried while they greeted us. They all speak absolutely pure French. They really are French, all those locals. We were treated like victors, like saviors.
These scenes confirmed that France and Belgium had been liberated from an evil grip, that this was a victory for the Allies. And in Eastern Europe, new nations arose out of shattered empires. They didn't wait for the peace conference to bring them self-determination. They tore down all signs of foreign rule and put up new frontiers. Poland carved a vast territory out of Germany and Russia. Czechoslovakia took land from Austria and Hungary. And Serbia realized the aim she'd started the war over by founding her own Slav superstate. The peace talks would recognize these new nations. They did not create them. 27 countries met in Paris to divide the spoils and define the peace.